Welcome to the podcast. Nathan Newberry here, your host. I have Grant Baldwin here joining us on the podcast. He is a speaker, but he also teaches people how to speak. You're going to hear about his life and his story and also the principles and habits behind how to build a speaking career. Before we dive into it, I want to give everybody a gift. So many times people want to build an audience, but they just lack the understanding of knowing how to do that. Down below in the show notes, I have a full training of how to build an online influence. And it's going to be really helpful and prevalent for you to hear Grant's story too of how he's done this, but it's also really helpful for you to do so. Down below, there's a training of how to do this that I want to give to you. Grant, as we're diving into it here, one of the questions I ask everybody is, what is high performance? What does that look like? What's that definition of a high performer?
Yeah, good question. So whenever I think of high performance, I think oftentimes that we think of like, how do you put the accelerator all the way to the floor and go as fast and hard as possible? And I think that I think I view it a little bit differently. I think that, high performance can be very, very subjective. And so the way I kind of think about it is being able to design life and play the game in a way that makes sense to you. And let me give you some examples of this. Like I remember years ago, it's been probably, I don't know, 6, 7 years ago, my wife and I decided to run a full marathon. And we had never really done much running or anything. It was more kind of like a bucket list thing. So like someday when I'm on the Nathan Newberry show, I could talk about this. And so the idea was that like when you standing at the starting line, the idea of running 26.2 miles just feels like ridiculous. That just feels completely impossible. But what we did when we were doing all of our training is rather than running 26.2 straight, is we would do this run walk method. And so you might run a couple minutes and then you'd walk a minute and run a couple minutes and walk a minute. And so the plan was to do that, and it just kind of spaces it out a little bit, and you're not, you're dying by the end, but not completely dying. And so I remember at the beginning of this race, we were literally like 2, 3 minutes into it, and there's thousands of people running this race, and we're already walking, and everyone's passing us, and you just feel stupid. You just feel like, what are we doing? Like everybody's still going. It's the beginning of the race. We have all this energy, all this adrenaline pumping, and we're suddenly walking. Well, then fast forward, we stick with that plan, and you get to mile 19, 20, 21, whatever. And you see a lot of people who are sucking wind and dying. And I think it's just a reminder of, you run the race in a way that makes sense for you. And so when you see someone who is, I come from the speaking space, and there's people that do 100, 150 gigs a year, and that's awesome. Good for them. And people that do 10 gigs a year, and that's awesome. Good for them. Like you get to design the game in a way that makes sense for you. And so to me, that's what high performance is being really, really clear on what you want the game to look like and defining for yourself what winning means.
That's so good. That's so good. Because I think people out the gate want to just create something of like, hey, I got to go all in, but then it's not sustainable. Yeah. And it's not life-giving, or they have, broken relationships from their kids or their spouses because their obsession has turned into a nightmare. So I like that. I like that.
Yeah, I think like you have to be intentional with how you choose to live life and build your business, whatever it is that you choose to do. You and I were talking a little bit just a second ago before we started recording about our family moved to Nashville about 10 years ago, and we didn't have any reason to move to Nashville. My wife and I were from Missouri, born and raised there. All of our families there, friends there, grew up there. We met there. There's no reason to have to leave to go somewhere else. And so I was out here in Nashville for a speaking gig and met a couple people and kind of got my wheels spinning. Like, man, Nashville seems like a really cool place. Personally, professionally, it seems like a cool place to raise our daughters. And so we ultimately made the decision to move out here. And I view it as just kind of like, hey, there's this big leap in some ways, and in other ways, it's like, no, like we get to choose where we live. We get to choose what we do for a living. We get to choose the kind of life that we want to have. 2 years ago or so, I got my pilot's license. I don't want to be a commercial pilot. I don't have any like Southwest offers like really good flights to a lot of places. I don't need to be a pilot, but for me, it's just kind of like, that seems kind of cool. Like, what are they doing up there? I want to learn how to do that.
Totally.
Just recently, a couple weeks ago, I started taking drum lessons. I don't want to play in a band. I don't want to know how to read music. I just think it'd be kind of cool. Right. So again, the point being is that like you get to design the rules to the game in a way that makes sense for you. And so a huge thing for myself, the way I try to live life, for our family, for our daughters, my wife, is that we try to live with like massive amounts of intentionality. That I don't want to get to the end of the life and be like, we just kind of like went through the motions, or we went with the path of least resistance, but we were intentional about deciding and choosing the kind of life that we want to live. And then we made decisions to go that direction versus, again, just kind of like going with the flow.
I love that. Now, tell the audience of what you do and what you created and how you serve people, so they get some really good context about you, who you are, a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm part of the team over at the Speaker Lab. And the Speaker Lab is basically a training company where we teach people the business of speaking. How do you find and book paid speaking engagements? And ultimately, how do you get booked and paid to speak? And so if we go way back in time, in high school, I was really involved in my local church, and my youth pastor had a big impact on my life. And I was like, I want to do that. Like, that seems really, gratifying, rewarding, fulfilling. And so that was kind of the path I was on. So I went to Bible college. I was a youth pastor at a local church for a little while. Parts of it I liked, parts of it I didn't like. But one thing I really enjoyed was speaking. And speaking was one of those things I felt like I was good at, enjoyed doing, wanted to do more of, but just was like, yeah, but how do you book gigs, and who hires speakers, and what do you speak about, and how much do you charge? And like, for most people, speaking is like this mysterious black box. And maybe for you watching, listening, maybe you've done a couple of gigs before and you're like, that was cool, I would love to do more of it. I don't know how. I just don't know what to do from here, and I don't know how this works. And that's exactly where I was at. And so this was about 20 years ago or so. There weren't any podcasts or resources or courses or books or trainings on the business of speaking. And so I found myself emailing other speakers, harassing other speakers, stalking other speakers. Can I pick your brain? Can I spam you until you answer my question? And just trying to learn something. And eventually got to a point where I was booking some gigs, and eventually was doing 60, 70 paid speaking engagements a year. And then had people asking me like, hey, I want to do that. How do I go about doing that? And they had a lot of the same questions that I had. How do you find gigs, and what do you speak about, and who hires speakers? How much do you charge? And so we started doing some coaching, some training around that. That evolved to the Speaker Lab. And so we've got a completely virtual company. We've got about 35, 40 people on the team, all over primarily the US, and help people all over the world understand how to get booked and paid to speak.
Dude, that's such a wild story, because it's so true. I mean, you find different things in life that give you the path that you're like supposed to do, and that looks different for everybody.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you were started out as being a pastor, like I was, and then that kind of transitioned to doing it commercially, and now it's become your career. And then you built and trained other people because you're also a teacher at heart. And
Sure.
like, what were some of the things or struggles or things that you dealt with when you were very beginning at the start of this?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things was leaving that youth pastor gig. And so, when you go to Bible college and, you do that for 4 years, and then you're like, all right, everyone, hello world, I'm going to be a youth pastor. And then you do it, and you're like, we were literally like a year and a half, 2 years into it, just thinking like, I don't know if I want to do this after all. And I'm not sure if this is what I signed up for. And I'm comparing notes with other buddies from Bible college. It's like, oh, you don't like this either, huh? Well, okay. Well, and you're trying to like find like, is there somewhere where the grass is greener on their side? And so what we ended up doing was ended up resigning from that position. And what was crazy though was my wife was 5 months pregnant, and there's nothing like bringing a kid into the world that just causes you to question everything. And so whenever we resigned this position, again, we were making like $30,000 a year as youth pastors. We were broke. And so then, you leave your safe, steady, secure paycheck and job, and everyone around us, well-meaning family and friends is like, hey, have you thought about this? Have you planned on this? Do you have any savings? No. What are you going to do for a living? I don't know. Was this a good idea? I'm not sure, and even my mom told us recently, she was like, I really thought you guys were going to have to move in with me. And it was just like, in some ways, it was a brutal, brutal season of life, of just going like, man, I thought my career was going to be doing this, and I got into it, and it ended up being something different. But now I want to do this thing over there, but I don't know quite how to make that happen and what I need to do. And at the same time, like I've got a newborn, and a wife I want to take care of, and you're just like, all these like doubts and insecurities and fears and worries and anxieties are just hitting you in the head. Like, dude, what are you thinking? Like, what are you doing now?
Yeah.
And it was just, I still look at that season as a really brutal season, but also like one of the best possible seasons in life, because it caused me to really think through, like, what do I really want to do? What is it that gives me life? And so the thing I kept coming back to is speaking. And I knew I wasn't the best speaker in the world. And I knew I wasn't the worst. I knew there was something there. I wanted to do more of it. But again, I just didn't know, like, how does this work? And so once I started kind of like, I booked that first gig, and, and I remember doing the gig, and I remember afterwards getting a check from the event planner. The check was for $1,000. And I mean, it may as well have been for $1 billion. It just felt like all the money.
Hmm.
And I remember I took that check. I remember going to my car in the parking lot and just breaking down into tears. Like, I cannot believe they just paid me $1,000 to speak. And it was just like a kind of a culmination of that past year of going, just all the doubts and questioning where you're going with life and what you're doing, and wondering if it's all going to work out, and like, maybe I'm making huge mistakes here, and I'm going to be ultimately a big failure. And it was rough. It was really, really rough. But I'm also, again, like, I'm really, really thankful for that season of life.
Mm-hmm. And those are the line of sand moments that are very hard to go through, but they've changed everything. Like,
Yeah,
when I've gone through some tough things, like, I wouldn't, my wife would say I don't want those challenges by any means, but
sure.
they have like crafted and built and forged a resiliency in your life of that's the direction that you needed to go.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I'll give you another example. Like, within the Speaker Lab, we started the company about 9 years ago. And for every year within the business, we had pretty significant double-digit growth year over year over year, 30, 50, 80% growth. And this past year, 2024, at the time of this recording, was just a really hard year for us. And it was the first year, like, we didn't grow. We were flat. And it was, there were some external things that we couldn't do anything about, and some internal things that we got to get better at. And on one hand, it's just like, it's frustrating, it's discouraging. On the other hand, I'm kind of like, I secretly enjoyed it. And I told the team this. I was like, I'm kind of glad we're getting our teeth kicked in right now, because ultimately it just makes us better as a
Mhm.
company. It forces us to be better. It forces us to innovate. It forces us to make better decisions, to be more strategic about what we're doing. And
Absolutely.
like, this is true with anything in life, like, my wife and I, we've been married 23 years, just celebrated 23rd wedding anniversary. We have a really, really good marriage. Like, we still really like each other. We really like being together, but it doesn't mean it's perfect. You have
Mhm.
those moments where you're just like, I don't know, I thought it was going to work, but maybe it won't work, and days where you feel like, I think I'm a decent parent. I think I'm a decent dad, but my kid just did this. Maybe I'm not, and like, we all have those things in life, whatever it may be, that can humble us and bring us back down to earth. But yeah, I don't even know where I was going with that, but something that I think we ultimately all deal with.
I remember someone asking or noticing Jeff Bezos going in and dealing with challenges.
Yeah.
And that kind of helped him craft more of like the deeper understanding around like desiring and seeing some of those challenges that are almost like puzzles that you have to then figure out on your own. And
Yeah.
so I think everybody needs to go through seasons of life to really kind of deal with that. I think that's needed in a way for us to grow, because growing pains hurt. Like being at the gym, going to
Yeah.
train for marathons. They're not easy. Even having kids is the hardest thing sometimes.
Yeah.
Of having to grow and be more patient and having
Yeah.
resilience. It's
I
not
mean, I
easy.
remember I mentioned getting my pilot's license, and part of being a pilot is you're obligated to tell everyone you're a pilot. It's like a vegan CrossFitter. You have to let everyone know that this is who you are. And I remember, like, when I first started taking lessons, that I'd go up, and you just feel like, oh my gosh, we are going to die at any moment. This is there's so much going on. There's so many buttons and dials and info on the screens, and you're like, how do you take all this in? And I vividly remember multiple times asking my flight instructor, like, hey, when does this get fun? Because right now it's just constantly stressful. And we would do a couple hours of a lesson, and then I'd leave, and the drive home, I just felt tense, and my neck hurt and my back hurt. And I was just like, this is not enjoyable at all. And fast forward, and I'm not a perfect pilot by any means, but I take it very, very seriously. I'm a very good, very safe, very diligent pilot. And I just feel a ton more confident versus like when you get started. And boy, I'm glad, I pushed through that,
Mhm.
and took that step of like, no, it's going to be hard. Like, that's the point of it. They don't pass out a pilot's license to anyone and
Yeah.
everyone. Like, you better make sure you know what you're doing, because once you get up there, you got to be able to get yourself back down, and whatever situation happens, you got to be able to stay calm and handle that. And so I'm really, grateful that I pushed through, because especially early on, those early days, you're just like, this is miserable. Like, this feels totally sketchy.
Let me ask you this. Entrepreneurs that are oftentimes like obsessed about something, right? Oddly obsessed. right? It's not just like a hobby. Sometimes it's just like we're obsessed around growth in our business, in our life, our spouse, our kids, a hobby, and business. Like the people that are world denting, like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. They're just obsessed so much so that it just like it you cannot think about anything else.
Mm-hmm.
When asking you this question around speaking, more often than not, people think that that's a part of, but not necessarily the whole thing they do. Where if that's all they want to do, there's only a season of it that they do it and then they get burned out. Like what how many speaking engagements are you doing now after building this business?
Yeah, good question. So right now I'm not really doing any. And so when I started speaking, that's all I wanted to do is I
Mhm.
wanted to book gigs, book gigs, book gigs. I did a book a couple years into it, but I wasn't trying to like do, pick up coaching clients. I didn't have a course. I wasn't doing consulting. It's just like, all I want to do is speak. I just want to book gigs. And speaking is like, I had a friend tell me one time, like speaking is a high paying manual labor job in
Mm.
that you get paid really, really well to stand on stage and run your mouth. But the nature of speaking is you got to get on a plane, you got to leave your family, you got to go somewhere. It's like a surgeon. A surgeon makes real good money to do what they do, but you got to show up and do surgery. So if you take days or weeks or months off, like, and you're not doing surgery or you're not getting on a plane and going to speak somewhere, like your income and impact dries up. And so
Mm.
I remember feeling like I don't have a business. I have a job. It's a cool job. I really, really enjoy it because the nature of the job is I get to travel around and I get to go to cool places and I get to stand on stage and people laugh at my jokes and want to take pictures with me and I sign autographs. And like, so there's a cool factor to that, but it's
Mhm.
also like, man, I also just kind of want to sleep in my own bed tonight and I don't know what time zone I'm in and I just want to go home. And, there's that side of it as well. But again, kind of going back to the original thing that we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation was that you get to decide what makes sense for you. Meaning, like, again, there's people that I know that do 50, 75, 100 gigs a year or more, and they love it. And that's all they want to do. And other people, they're like, I'm just not at a season of life where that would make sense. And so I only want to do, 1 gig a month. That's also fine. I have a friend who they speak full time, a very, very successful career, and they say I don't travel on weekends. So I'll do whatever gig wherever, as long as like I don't have to leave till Monday morning and I can be back by Friday night because I want to be with my kids on the weekend,
Mhm.
right? And so they may lose out on some gigs because of that, but that's fine. Like, again, they get to decide the rules of the game. Someone else I know says, "Hey, I only want to do gigs within a couple hour radius of my home." And again, that limits what the options and possibilities are. But again, they get to choose that. They get to decide that versus feeling like, well, if I'm going to be a speaker, I got to do all of these things. Like there's trade-offs there on both sides of the equation there. But again, you get to decide. You can't play like I'm this victim or woe is me or something. It's like no, you chose that, and so you get the upside of it, but you also have the quote unquote downside that may come along with that. And so I think that for the season of life that I'm in right now, like I'm enjoying being the founder, owner, CEO of the Speaker Lab. That keeps me plenty busy. And versus like, maybe a different season of life. It's like, no, I really enjoyed doing, 50, 60, 70 gigs a year. And that also required me to be on the road 80, 90 nights a year. So, ultimately, again, everybody gets to decide what makes sense for them.
Let me ask you this question because I think people they're on the fence. They're like, hey, maybe speaking will help me grow my influence or build my business. And so it's like a lead generation
Mm-hmm.
opportunity.
Oh yeah.
You get video and pictures of you on stages. So there's the authority that's kind of built around things. You could sell merch or a book or whatever. But there's the challenges of like being away from the family.
Mm-hmm.
But talk about the opportunity there that people don't realize, the opportunity of where people are looking for speakers and people that have certain skills. Like what's the opportunity that people are missing? Because I think sometimes people are like, oh, I haven't done much speaking, or I'd like to do more but I'm not sure about it. Like talk about like the industry as a whole and the demand that's there that people just don't realize that there's a big opportunity in whole.
Yeah,
for?
one of the great things about speaking is, again, you can use it in a lot of different ways, not just in terms of like the volume and quantity of gigs that you are doing, but how it kind of fits in, incorporates into your business. And I think this is super important. This is one thing we talk with speakers about regularly is you've got to be clear for you about how speaking fits into your business. So meaning like early on, all I wanted to do was book gigs, right? And so that's my sole focus. Whereas now, if I were to go do a gig, it has to make sense in the context of moving the needle for the speaker lab. And so me going out and doing, a keynote or workshop or whatever at XYZ company because they're going to pay me a couple bucks, like that's just not, it doesn't excite me and it doesn't really move the needle. And so you got to be clear about like how speaking fits in for you. And so it could be purely like, I want to go speak and I collect a check and that's kind of the end of the transaction. Or like you said, it could be something where you are doing speaking more as a lead gen tool. And so maybe you have some type of, service-based business or coaching or consulting or whatever it may be. And speaking is one of those things that you kind of alluded to it, Nathan, where speaking, if you're at an event, a conference, whatever it may be, and you see someone on stage, like there's a certain amount of authority, credibility, cachet that we ascribe to that person, right? Because whatever this event is that I trusted to come and be an attendee at, and I see someone up on stage, like surely they vetted this person. This person is standing up there for, 30, 45, 60 minutes, whatever it may be, talking. I'm resonating, learning, nodding along, taking notes, hearing what they say. And then if they offer something else on the backside, it's like a really well done infomercial that I can learn from and say, I want to do more business with that person. And I think that that's a really important distinction because let me give you an example. There was a client we worked with a while back, and she, let me remember this. Her business was, she was doing identity theft protection for high net worth individuals. Okay. Identity theft protection for high net worth individuals, kind of a niche thing. And so she said, hey, I've booked a couple gigs and I'm getting paid, $500, $1,000, $2,500 here and there. But I'm trying to figure out, how else I can incorporate this into the business. Right. And she's just kind of doing these one-off gigs. And I said, rather than looking at speaking as purely just like this, like a lot of people look at it as just like a financial thing. I go speak, I collect a check, and that's kind of the end of the transaction. I said, let's figure out how do we best incorporate this into what you're already doing within your identity theft protection business. And so for her, the lifetime value of a client was tens of thousands of dollars. Like most people stay with her for years and years and years, decades, right? And so what she said was she started shifting where she was going. And so she may go speak at something and may still get paid $1,000 or a couple $1,000s, but she was at the right type of events where it was either, high net worth individuals who are in the audience or people who were kind of tangential to that space of financial advisors or attorneys, people that worked with that same type of clientele. And she said, hey, I just spoke at this event. I picked up multiple clients that's worth multiple six figures for her in terms of lifetime value, worth way more than what the event would ever pay her. And she said that was some like the best marketing that I have ever done. And so it can work really well from that standpoint. Speaking can be a great resource for networking as well. Anytime that you are at an event, everybody's got their badges or lanyards on, and you see someone who's a speaker, there's a certain amount of credibility that goes along with that, right? And it's a heck of a lot easier as a speaker to connect with attendees or to connect with other speakers. And so whenever there's some type of like, pre-conference speaker hangout or green room or something where you're able to rub shoulders with other speakers that are there,
Right.
that can be a huge, huge credibility boost. So speaking can work well in a lot of different avenues, again, depending on what it is, what your goals may be.
And in leaning on to that influence, you're networking with other high level people. Like I'm looking on your social media right now, Michael Hyatt, Brandon Beer, and I'm sure there's tons of other great people that you've been able to network and connect with. How has that kind of shaped your business even then? Have they worked with you as clients, or they came and worked with you as a client, or like how does that networking and talk a little bit about the opportunity there when you're connecting with other like-minded people that are on stage with you, or the connections?
Yeah, the other thing I would say whenever it comes to speaking in terms of like networking, and this is part of the reason that we moved to Nashville, is in the online digital space that we all play in. It's one thing to connect with someone over Zoom or email or a DM. It's another thing to see them in person.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing will replace, shaking hands and high fives and hugs and handshake, like the whole in-person thing. And so this is part of, again, like why we moved to Nashville, is I knew a bunch of people that were out here, people like a Michael Hyatt that I might, I kind of knew, not really. He didn't know who I was. But then coming out here and knowing, living 10, 15 minutes away from each other, and building a relationship over time, it changes the dynamic of the relationship. And the same thing, like when you see someone in person, Nathan, it's one thing for you and I to chat, online right now, but if we hang out in person, like it just changes the dynamic. Oh, Nathan's my boy, like it changes everything completely. And so speaking is one of those things that allows you to connect with people in person, not over email, not over some webinar, not over some type of social media platform, but like, no, like I stood there and I shook their hand and I got to know them as like a person. And that just really, again, changes the dynamics of relationships. So it's another way that, again, speaking can be a really powerful tool.
I feel like that's a long-term play too. I mean, a short-term play is like I post something on social media and I email, but then there's another connection of building your network, which is also your net worth.
Yeah.
And talk about that clout and what that's been able to bring you to.
Yeah, I'll give you an example of this. Like, I am very intentional about building relationships with people, and it's very important to me. My network, that sort of thing. And so, let's see, not last week before, 2 weeks ago, I flew down to Austin, Texas, and I had a bunch of people down there, and I was there for 48 hours, and I had 9 different meetings, and it was just person after person after person after person. And I wasn't there for a conference. I wasn't there for a mastermind. And so each time I'd get together with someone, they'd be like, what are you in town for? I was like, I came to see you. That's literally why I'm here. And people that, like, some of them I knew really well and gave me an excuse to go see them. And some people, like, I just met for the first time and met through a friend of a friend or someone I hadn't seen in a couple of years or talked to. And all I was doing, there was no other people I talked to are like, well, what are you going for? Is there some type of ask or request, or like, what are you trying to get them to do? It's like, I don't have it. There's nothing. I'm not doing any launch. I don't have any promotion. I don't have any affiliate thing I need. I'm not doing anything. And one of the last guys I met with, he was like, man, that is so cool. He's like, you are here just planting seeds, and you are, whenever it comes to like relationships, there's credits and debits. And right now you're just going around spreading credits and you don't need anything. You're just spreading credits. And someday, we'll probably take a debit on that. But right now, like, you're just passing out credits. And that's all I did for 48 hours, was just hang out with people, build relationships, because I see and I recognize the value of that. And again, I can't quantify that today of, hey, here's, the exact ROI that came from this thing. But I know that there will be, value that comes from that, because it was an in-person thing versus just like texting some people here and there.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you some tactical things here. Speaking is definitely what everybody should be doing to get on stages. Well, maybe not everybody, but selective people that really want to grow their audience. I believe that that's an important part with it. But like you had alluded to at the very beginning, it's like a black hole. It's like the unknowns of like, how do I go and book events? Do I have someone on my team help me hunt these down? Do I do that? And what's like the really time that they should carve out each day to really kind of look at that? Because I would think if they can at least say, if they can get on, 5 to 10 stages this year, that would probably drastically increase their ROI in their business.
Yeah.
If they have a service or online productized coaching offer or whatever, it would drastically increase them. How would they go about finding the right ones? What's the time? How do they connect? What's kind of the secret sauce there to do that?
Yeah. So I'll give you a few thoughts. So at the Speaker Lab, one of the things we do is we teach what we call the Speaker Success Roadmap. It makes the acronym SPEAK, SPEAK. And this is kind of the process that we teach in terms of how do you actually get booked and paid to speak? How do you find and book gigs on a consistent basis? But maybe even before that, as just like some precursor prologue to that. Prologue? Is that whatever?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I don't remember prologues before or after. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I think you have to be clear, like we touched on, is like, how does speaking fit into your business? And what is it that you are hoping to get out of speaking? Because the mistake we see a lot of speakers make is they go, well, I'd love to do 10, 15, 20 gigs a year, whatever the amount is, right? But they're just not willing to put in the effort to get there. And speaking is no different than anything else. Like you get out of it what you put into it. And if it's just going to be like this little side project, like, I'll just, I'll dabble in it and I'll kind of kick the tires of it. Then you can't be surprised when you're not getting the level of results that you expect. And so if you put in amateur effort you're going to get amateur results. You can't put in amateur effort and expect professional results. So, and again, this isn't exclusive to speaking. This is true with anything, right? So I'm, like I said, I'm learning to play the drums. And so if I just say once a week, I'm going to take 15 minutes and I'm going to practice drums, and then fast forward 6 months and I'm going to be sad or frustrated or disappointed why I'm not better. Well, because I just haven't put any effort or energy into it, compare that with someone who's spending an hour a day practicing. Well, wait a second, they're better than me. That's not fair, right? It's like, it doesn't work like that. And then the same thing that you mentioned earlier is people oftentimes get interested in speaking and we just want to outsource everything. I don't want to book the gigs. I don't want to market myself. I don't want to sell myself. I want someone else. How do I find a bureau? How do I find an agent? How do I find someone else that's going to do all these things for me? And it's kind of like I always think of it like your health and fitness, It's like, I want to be in good shape, but I don't want to eat healthy. And I don't want to lift heavy things. Like, you can get a trainer who's going to tell you what to do, and you can get a nutritionist who can tell you what to eat. But at the end of the day, you got to put some work into it. You can't just outsource this and think, I'm perfectly healthy and I have this great physique now, because everyone else took care of it for me. It just doesn't work like that, right? So that's some foundational things. So if it's cool, I can kind of walk through the speak framework at kind of a high level, and then kind of bounce around wherever you want. All right, so the S here. S is select a problem to solve. Select a problem to solve. So 2 key questions you got to ask. Number 1 is, who do you speak to? And number 2 is, what problem are you solving? Who do you speak to? What problem do you solve? Now, the danger is that we tend to want to spread the net as far and wide as possible. And so, who do I speak to? I don't know, man. I speak to humans. I speak to people. My message is for everybody, right? And what do I speak about? I don't know. What do you want me to speak about? I can talk about anything. I talk about, faith or family or business or marketing or leadership or sales or parenting or yada, 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 right? And it's like we just want to speak. And so we want to spread the net as far and wide as possible. And it's counterintuitive, but the more narrow, the more focused you are, the easier it is to actually find and book gigs. And so the way we always talk about this is, let's imagine, Nathan, you and I are going out to eat. We're looking for a good steak. Okay. We have a choice. We could go to a buffet where steak is one of 100 things that they offer, and they're all mediocre. Or we could go to a steakhouse where they do one thing, but they do that one thing really well. So at a steakhouse, they don't do tacos, they don't do lasagna, they don't do sushi, they don't do spaghetti, they do steak, and that's it, right? And that's what we want to be as speakers. We want to be the steakhouse, not the buffet, versus trying to be all things to all people. No, I do this. I'm really good at this. There's a whole bunch of other things I could do, but no, this is the lane that I am in. And again, this isn't exclusive to speakers. We understand this in any other context of entrepreneurship, but being really, really good at solving one specific problem for one specific audience. So that's the S, select a problem to solve. The P is to prepare your talk. Prepare your talk. And ultimately, this means getting clear on what's the solution that you're providing. How are you providing that solution? Keynotes, workshops, breakouts, webinars, seminars, they all work. But how are you going to deliver value to that audience in a way that an event planner wants to hire you for? Next part, E, is to establish yourself as the expert. Establish yourself as the expert. So 2 key marketing assets that speakers need. You need a website and you need a demo video. Website and demo video. So in this day and age, if you don't have a website, you don't exist. It's just hard for people to take you seriously. And then a demo video is kind of like we like to think of it like a movie trailer. So before you go see a movie, you want to see that trailer. And the trailer is basically, they're going to take a 90-minute, 2-hour movie. They're going to boil it down to 2 or 3 minutes. And within those 2 or 3 minutes, you have an idea of who's in it, what's the plot, what's the theme, what's the genre. And the goal of the movie trailer and the goal of the demo video is to make people want to see more. And so before someone's going to hire you, they want to see something. Like, their event planners are in the risk mitigation business. If I hire you, if I give you a microphone, if I put you up on stage in front of my audience and you say something inappropriate or to embarrass me or controversial or just rude or whatever it may be, you make me look bad, right? And so event planners don't want to take that risk. They got to report to a board, a boss, a committee, whatever it may be. They got to make sure, okay, this person better do a good job. And so that demo video is some of that risk mitigation, the risk reversal for them. Next part of the process is A, acquire paid speaking gigs. Acquire paid speaking gigs. Now, this is the part we want to fast forward to. Bro, just tell me how to book gigs. But again, hopefully you see now, if you don't have some of these other foundational pieces in place first, it's really hard to book gigs. Who do you speak to? What do you speak about? I don't know. I just want to speak, and tell me about your talk. I haven't worked on it yet. I don't know what it's going to be, but I just want to speak, and your website or demo video. Nah, I don't need any of those things. I just want to speak. It's like, you got to have some foundational pieces in place first here that help you to kind of build some of that momentum. And so the big thing that we teach when we talk about inside the Speaker Lab is whenever it comes to finding and booking gigs is you want to be much more proactive than reactive. So a mistake speakers will make is saying like, hey, I got my website, I got my video, and now I just sit back and I wait for the phone to ring, or I throw some things on social media and put some posts up there. If you need a speaker, hope you think of me, you know, and they put in their bio speaker, which everybody has, and like it means nothing. And like they're not actually doing anything to book gigs. And so from here, we want to be proactive and like identifying the types of events that we would be a good fit for, reaching out, starting conversations, following up, and just following a sales process to be able to consistently book gigs. And the last part of the process, K, is knowing when to scale. Knowing when to scale, meaning people who are interested in speaking, as we've kind of been talking about here, are probably also interested in writing a book or coaching or consulting or doing a course or doing any number of things. And so you can do all the things, but you can't do them all at once. Some things are going to come first, some things are going to come last. You got to be clear about how speaking kind of fits into the mix there. So I know I talked a lot there. I know I gave you a whole bunch there. I know it's kind of drinking from a fire hose, but that's kind of the overall speak framework that we teach at the Speaker Lab.
I love it. Thank you for doing that. I've read your book, Grant, and people need to go buy your book too, because it's super practical of all these steps down in a lot more detail. And then, of course, you have your whole program that does it even more so with accountability and coaching too. So people need to connect with you further. But how can people follow you and connect with you even more?
Yeah, everything we do is over at thespeakerlab.com, thespeakerlab.com. If you listen to this show, you probably listen to other shows. And so we got a podcast by the same name, the Speaker Lab Podcast. We got over 500 episodes there, hundreds of hours of free content. Nathan, you mentioned the book, The Successful Speaker, 5 Steps for Booking Gigs, Getting Paid, Building Your Platform. And so it takes that speak framework we talked about and goes into for a couple hundred pages more in depth there. So yeah, definitely check that out. And if there's anything we can do to help or support, let us know.
Awesome. I'll put that link down below. Go connect with Grant and really kind of learn the ins and out of speaking, because it's so important in these days to do that. So if you have an inkling and a desire, go check that out. And then if you're looking to build an online brand side by side with what's going to help you build speaking connection, you need to know some more of that. There's that free gift down in the show notes as well for that training I want to give you guys. Thanks again, Grant, for being on, and we will see you and hear from you on the next episode of the Nathan Newberry Show.